All right, so welcome to part two of this where now that my computer has restarted accidentally. So I can't remember exactly where I was finishing my thought, but to get to the punchline for where we are with the dependent variable, it's in this section, we're not giving procedure, but rather we are giving the justification for the use of the variable itself, the definition of the variable and the justification for the use of it itself, all right? For the independent variable, it's basically going to be the same idea. So whether we are replicating someone else's independent variable or if the independent variable is the new thing that is being done, we are not describing how the variable is going to be implemented, but rather just stating what it is. So if throughout this course, we've talked a lot about the use of testing or the concept of testing various curricula. We might just say the independent variable is the implementation of X, Y, and Z curriculum for the academic year. That could be all we put there. The independent variable in and of itself is going to, as a known quantity, is going to have a procedural step or background to it. It's not expected that it's going to be described multiple times. Here in the independent variable, we are really just stating what it is going to be, and it will be known that it will be described in more detail in the procedure. So when it comes to the defining the variables, what you really want to be focusing on your definition of is your dependent variable. This is what it is. This is why we're using it. Here's the evidence that shows that it is a valid variable in and of itself. All right. Once you've done that, we contrast that with the description of the implementation of the variables in the procedure. The procedure section is your general case implementation from beginning to end. This is where you are not only going to describe what you actually do to what types of questions you ask, what are the things that you set up, how you manipulate the environment to get the things that you need, but you talk about when you move from your dependent variable to your independent variable. You talk about, generally speaking, how you are interacting with your participants. You would, if there are any rules to the implementation of either your dependent or independent variable, this is where you say what those things are. All of the specifics for what someone would need to do to replicate the running of your dependent and independent variable, that's what goes into your procedure. So you've already defined what those two things are. You've validated those two things. Now you are saying how to actually do those new things. The challenge in the procedure section is regardless, is to be able to give that general case as opposed to the specifics of what you actually did for every participant that you have. When you have, regardless of whether you have 2 or 3 participants or whether in a single subject design, or you have hundreds or thousands of participants in a group experimental design, it's not going to be the case that every single individual is going to experience 100% the exact same thing. There are going to be times where you use different language. There are going to be times where you have different toys. There are going to be times where, the rooms aren't going to be exactly the same. So you're not looking to describe describe the case for every single individual, but rather this is generally speaking what we did. And if you were to replicate it, this is what you would try and do. Now, some of those differences, some of those discrepancies are important. Some of the times that where you have to change your language, um, some of the times you have to change your materials. If that is the case, that needs to be discussed in your discussion. And that is used to help interpret your results. But that is not a part of the procedure itself. Now, it will be time, there might be times where you say, we had to move all participants into this location in a room or outside of a room or had to be in a quiet hallway or something like that. And you may say that future research dictates that that has to be done. However, that is not a part of the current procedure. All right. So when you are looking at that general case procedure, again, it is what we would do for most groups. And I think going back to that concept of implementation of a curriculum for an independent variable is a perfect example of that. If you give a curriculum to 20 teachers and you say, implement this exactly as it is written, as it is written, that implementation across a school year, across a day, across an hour, is not going to look exactly the same for every single individual. If the effectiveness of a curriculum relied on every single teacher delivering that instruction in exactly the same way to every single student, we would never have effective curricula, right? If the words, the pictures, the numbers, if all of that was so critical to instruction, to learning, then no one would ever learn. I guess that's probably the right way to say that. So the slight variations, the non-critical variations in the implementation of the independent variable, in this case the curriculum, are okay. And we need to know that we don't lose validity of the study based on those. Now, if you start bringing in additional supplemental curriculum, maybe to bolster fluency progress or numeracy or something, if we're doing a math curriculum, that's a different story. Those are significant materials beyond what is being defined as your independent variable. So the understanding, I guess if we look at this in two different ways, there's one way where we could alter the curriculum by, say, giving different problem sets, and maybe the curriculum says give problem sets as needed. And another would be by bringing in supplemental curricula. If we have to do that second piece, then we lose the validity of the curriculum because it doesn't say bring in this other curriculum in order to address this piece. It just says change the problem sets, or maybe it says don't change the problem sets, just give these. All right. So that general case teaching, which becomes your instructor's manual in a curriculum, if you're using an intervention of some sort, there's always going to be the how to do it. That's basically derived from the procedure in whatever the study is that whatever the study is that validated the curriculum, that becomes your procedure guide, right? Because that is what has been shown to be valid. So it will say you can deviate here. You have to stick to this. Make sure to give these lessons. You don't necessarily have to give these lessons. All of that is developed from the evidence that suggests what are the critical and variable attributes for the success of this intervention. We do an intervention where we play a game with our kids where it basically beat the teacher type game where, you know, students move up for certain behaviors, and if they don't emit those behaviors, then the teachers move up. And what we have found is that the number of spaces on that game doesn't matter. The visualization of the game to a point doesn't matter. The number of responses to move up doesn't matter as long as you are consistent. So when we describe what we do in the procedure, we may describe, this is how many spaces we did. This is the type of amount of behavior that we required. But in the discussion, we can say, we varied these based on the types of kids. So in one case, we used a Batman game board. In another case, we used a sports game board. In another case, we, whatever it may be. So finding the essential elements and describing those to your study, that's what we're looking for in that procedure section. So the challenge here is going to be, as I think you guys see, the preventing or avoiding overlap in our discussion of the variables or description of the variables and the procedure, and getting all of that critical information to whoever is reading the paper itself. All right. What is very important to be able to communicate in your procedure is that protocol for how or when to move from dependent variable into independent variable, out of independent variable, back into your dependent variable. How much of an intervention to deliver, how much measurement to look for, especially when you're talking about a pre-dependent measure where you're not expecting to see lots of behavior or high amounts of behavior. How do you show that you don't just have a fluke low behavior, but rather that is representative of the actual thing? So let's go back to that idea of social interactions between children or between peers. If I observe for 5 minutes in setting 1 and 5 minutes in setting 2 and 5 minutes in setting 3, can I determine that that is enough? Or do I need more data? And if I need more data, or if I determine that that is enough, what qualifications did I predetermine that allowed me to make that determination, right? So one way to address that is to determine ahead of time how many times you are going to begin giving that pre-variable. And so let's say I've decided that I'm going to give that 5-minute sample in each of those settings 3 different times. So I'm going to have a total of 45 minutes of observation. I'm going to do those on 3 consecutive days. And if there is significant variation in my data, then I'll take a 4th or a 5th data point as needed. All right. Do I need stability across those between the different settings? When you decide on these things ahead of time, that allows you to take the subjectivity out of it, but that and give it more of an objective feel, which is good. But you want to make sure that you are defining what those rules are in either probably in your procedure, or reiterating that in your procedure. So you can say, once the dependent variable was measured across 3 consecutive days, the data were analyzed to show stable trends across or between the 3 different settings. We were able to move from the dependent section, the dependent variable procedure, into the implementation of the intervention, something along those lines. All right. That interplay about the experimental procedure, that's the piece that we are really looking for in that procedure section. All right, so for our purposes now, I know we've talked about participant and settings before. We spoke about design. We spoke about variables today. We spoke about procedure today. Procedure in a group design is a little bit different. Again, using that example of a curriculum, you're not going to be spelling out what is done day by day in the curriculum, but rather you may provide appendices that they give outlines of scope and sequence, something like that, or for reference, see whatever curriculum it's going to be. You don't have to give that every single step. Again, I'll go back to general case, right? So if the procedures are published somewhere else, if they're widely available, if you're using Eureka Math as your independent variable, you can say for an outline of procedures of Eureka Math, go visit this website, look at this appendix, and you'll be off and running. All right. You don't want your procedures to be unclear. You don't want your readers to get lost in those procedures. However, you want to make sure that there's enough detail so that someone can pick it up, read it, and go and replicate it. And that is always the challenging balance. The challenging balance for that procedure section. Okay. As we spoke about at the beginning, when we were talking about abstracts, your best models for those, hopefully your best models for your procedure section, are the articles that you are reading. Look at the types of information that they are putting in those sections. Look at the amount of detail. Look at the different ways that they present that information. I say hopefully they are good models because unfortunately there are lots of really poorly written procedure sections out there. And those procedure sections make replication of those data or of those experiments very, very challenging. My professor has, years and years and years, my graduate professor, years and years and years ago developed a procedure for this new intervention. And to this day, we see people misinterpreting that procedure constantly. And it's one of those things where unless you see a video of someone doing it, it's challenging to really understand what they're asking you to do. But once you see it in action, it's very, very easy. So that's a challenge that anyone in my graduate program or anyone in our graduate program who tries to replicate that's a challenge for all of them, is making sure that they are interpreting those procedures correctly. Where that gets really, really important is that we now have published research based on basically the opposite findings of that previous research based on a misinterpretation of those procedures. So making sure or trying as best you can to make sure that those procedures are as clear as they need to be is key for someone else being able to pick up your research and be able to do the same thing, right? I know I'm beating a dead horse. The flip side of that is it can't be so specific that they pick it up and they miss changes that need to be made, maybe for specific individuals, as is often the case. All right, stop belaboring that point. Participants and materials, design, variables, procedures. Those are the sections that you guys are going to be putting in your method section that you're going to be evaluated on. Again, it's all hypothetical. Hopefully we come away with something pretty good there. Are there any questions about that? Kim, I see that you've joined us as well. Claire, you've got the whole of that, for better or worse. Any questions there?
No, I had an appointment. I was just logging on, so I have to go back and look at the recording.
No worries, Kim. All right. So to end for today, let's have, I'm gonna have a brief little conversation about the possibilities of discussion sections. And if you want to add a discussion slide in your presentation, this would hopefully help kind of guide you. So in our discussion sections, and I know I've said this before, but we'll come back to it now. Your discussion section, generally speaking, has a couple different components to it. There is the analysis of your results, which you guys aren't going to be able to do. There's going to be the analysis of your results in the context of prior results from your lit review. So you will actually tie what you found to what you discussed in your lit review. Did you find similar findings? Did you find similar findings to some of the research that you reviewed? Did you find different findings? You will be talking about limitations to your own research, and you will be talking about possibilities for future research. If you can get those four things into your lit review, you are in really good shape. All right, so let's talk about those in component by component. So the analysis of your own results. You are in the results section, all you have done have provide numeric findings of or the numbers of what you actually did. So there's no discussion about what those numbers mean until you get to your discussion. In your discussion session, what were your findings significant? How significant were they, and how do you know? Is it a visual analysis? Is it a statistical test? Were your results significant for some participants, but not all participants? How should we look at your results in a vacuum? And we found no significant differences. We did not see any increases or loss. Whatever it is, how are you interpreting what you did or what you saw? All right. That should be simple. The analysis in context of previous findings, that can be a little trickier. And the reason that can be tricky is you have most likely changed variables somewhere along the way. Either you've modified your dependent or your independent variable. You're probably not doing a straight replication. So you would not expect to see necessarily exact same findings. Now, if you do, that's great. No problems there. But what you want to be able to focus on is, if you do see same findings, what does that tell you about the expansion of what you have done? So we found similar findings to XYZ et al., which seems to show that this procedure is just as effective for 10 to 14-year-olds as it is for 6 to 10-year-olds. Maybe we had a different participant pool, right? It's just as effective for students with special needs as it is for general education students. It's just as effective when delivered on a computer as it is when it's delivered by person, right? So being able to say, if we find similar results, this is why that matters and what we expanded upon. If we find dissimilar results, why? Is it a population difference? Is it a procedural difference? Maybe this is effective when you give 50 examples of whatever it is that instructional examples, but not when you give 20. There's something significant there in the change of the independent variable. Maybe you have an independent variable that you've kept the same, but a dependent variable that has changed. So we found that this curriculum is still effective for reading comprehension, but is not effective for this new dependent variable of fluency. All right. So you want to be able to use or compare and contrast your current study with prior studies and be able to give the reader some understanding of where your results fit in the current context. The challenging result is when you do a direct replication of something and with similar participant groups, similar procedures, similar materials, and then get different results based off of that. That's where you have to do a little bit of digging and try and understand why your results are what they are. And maybe you don't have an answer. Maybe you need a tiebreaker study. Maybe you need a third study that replicates, again, the same thing with the same population to see what they come up with. I've mentioned before the gold standard in certain types of research. Well, one of the qualifications for something becoming evidence-based has to do with how many times a study has been replicated directly with participant groups in different regions, with different research groups. It's important that it's not the same person or group of people doing something over and over and over and over, and they say, yep, it works, we're good to go, right? We have to be able to see that different people can do this thing and get like results. And again, if you don't, we have to have an understanding of why. Oftentimes, if you have group 1 gets one result, group 2 gets another result, group 1 will review group 2's research and probably follow up saying, we see what they did. Here's our understanding of why they got a different result. And again, that should lead to more research. So you have your own analysis, you have the analysis in context, and then you have those two last parts, limitations and future research. Limitations. This is an incredibly necessary, I think, component of good research. This is you understanding what you could have done better, or what went wrong, or what you were not able to control for, or what was unexpected. No experiment is perfect. Our ability to demonstrate to our readers why we understand that this was not perfect helps us become more believable, helps us get to that point where we can say, here is how I need to view my results with a grain of salt. We were limited in age. We had 5 participants that started, but we lost 2. So there was attrition. We didn't get to the end. We didn't get to finish with someone. We had to stop at a certain point because whatever. We had to change some of the materials here. We had to add different things here. Why wasn't this kind of poke holes in your own research? If a reader thinks that you think that you did everything well, and a reader pokes their own holes in your research, they're going to discount your findings because they're going to think, well, they did this, but they didn't consider this or this or this or this or this. If you show we are considering all of these concerns, then it allows the reader to know that the analysis that you provided makes sense in the context of your own individual case study. All right. When we talk about the individual variations of what was actually done for particular participants or groups, this is where that comes in, where we say we didn't just follow the script, or we couldn't just follow the script, and here's why, and here's how that changes our results. You are not necessarily predicting what would have happened had you done A, B, C, or D, but rather saying the potential impact lies in this variable that was not addressed in some way, shape, or form. It is okay to have limitations. It is expected that you will have limitations. If you don't have limitations, that's a limitation. That means you did something wrong, or you missed something, or you didn't understand, or that should be a limitation for your reader, that something is off in that study that needs to be reviewed with a grain of salt. The best part about limitations, or identifying those limitations, is those can become the launching point for future research. If you recognize that this was a variable that you couldn't necessarily control for, next time, replicate the study and control for it. Add other participants. Go back to 5 participants. Go back to 10 groups. Try to not change those materials. Try to limit whatever it's going to be. That's one way of looking at future research. Fix your limitations, especially when you have new research where you don't have someone else's mistakes to learn from. You only have your research to learn from. Replicating your own findings with tighter controls is a great place to start. Beyond that, in your future research, you should be really looking at, okay, given my findings in context, and here's the fun part, what is the next question? What questions does this finding lead to? What questions do these findings lead to? How can we use this single data point in the spectrum of the research universe to ask more questions? Good research leads to more questions than it answers. Good research answers a single question. It has to. Because research, we spoke about this way back in week 1. Good research is incremental in nature. We ask one question, we get one answer, and from that one answer, we can ask a dozen more questions. And each of those folks, each of those pieces becomes a new line of research. If your research doesn't lead to any questions, I won't even say that's the research's fault. You're not thinking about it in that broader context. What does this mean? And then how do we go and test this? One of the fallacies of research is that I can't think that way. I don't know how to think that way. I don't know how to come up with research questions. We shouldn't have to. You go, you read a research article, you go to the end, you find what their recommendations are for future research, and do that. You should never have to think of a research question on your own. You should be able to find those questions in the prior literature. Where it comes to finding your own research questions, happens after you've already done your study and you have all these burning questions anyway about what does this mean? What do we do next? How do I test this? How do I do the next thing? But the starting point is someone else's ending point. Your ending point becomes someone else's starting point. So as you're thinking about your discussion sections, those are the components that you want to be thinking of. Analysis of your results, analysis of your results in a broader context, limitations, and future research. All right, I will stop there. So again, this is the second part of the lecture. You should have part 1 and part 2, and I will make sure that that's very clear on the recordings for next week. If you would like to, please send me a quick email to let me know that you're interested in presenting, so I have a list of that and can budget time-wise, and then we'll be done. I am working through grading as we speak. So hopefully in the next couple of days, you will get a flurry of grading activity, and I think we'll be in good shape. All right. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Sid, for the first half. I'm sorry about the broken up lecture, and I will see you guys all next week. Take care.